The soft, definitive click of the boardroom's mahogany door was the only sound in the marble hallway. It felt louder, more final, than the polite, muffled laughter I could just make out from inside. The last thing I registered before the latch engaged was my Uncle Richard's voice. "This meeting is for the adults, Ava," he'd said, his words a precisely aimed barb meant only for me. Through the narrow pane of glass next to the door, I saw them all. My cousin Leo, who didn't even bother to look back. My Aunt Diana, adjusting her diamond necklace, her face a carefully constructed mask of utter disinterest. Not a single one of them met my gaze. It was the same cold, casual dismissal from 7 years prior, a wound they'd just torn open again with a flick of the wrist. They were settling into their plush leather seats, preparing to plead for a lifeline from some anonymous savior. They had absolutely no clue that the mystery investor they were so desperately waiting for, the one person holding the power to either save or utterly demolish them, was already in the building. They had just slammed the door in her face. But before I get into that, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. In my family, power wasn't measured in affection or respect. It was a cold, hard currency, and my grandfather, Theodore Monroe, was the man who first printed it. He built Monroe Manufacturing from the ground up. I have this one faded memory of him, not in a crisp suit, but in his work clothes, smelling faintly of metal and machine grease. He'd hoist me onto his hip, his hands rough and strong, and gesture to the bustling factory floor visible from his modest office window. "You see that, Ava?" he'd say, his voice a low, warm rumble. "That's real. When you create something with your own 2 hands, it's yours forever." He had a deep faith in the tangible, in the heft of a well-crafted machine, in the honest sweat of a day's labor. He knew every worker on that factory floor by name and often ate his lunch with them in the noisy break room, not in some secluded executive dining hall. He was a creator. When he passed away, my world tilted on its axis. The very center of our family's gravity, the one solid, real thing, had vanished. The funeral was a formal, somber event, crowded with people in dark suits offering condolences that felt hollow and rehearsed. I remember watching my Uncle Richard, my grandfather's only son, as he stood near the casket. He wasn't weeping. He was scanning the room, shaking hands, his eyes already calculating the power he was about to inherit. He wasn't a creator. He was a collector. He collected money, status, and connections, but he never grasped the soul of the company that was handed to him. A week later, my grandfather's will was read in a sterile, mahogany-paneled conference room. I was 19, a freshman at the University of Chicago. My cousins Leo and Isabel were there, looking utterly bored. Aunt Diana was already discussing plans to redecorate the family estate. The lawyer, a man with a tired voice and weary eyes, droned on through the legalese. The lion's share of the company, the controlling interest, went to Richard. It was what everyone expected. Leo and Isabel, his children, were granted executive and training roles and hefty trust funds. At 22 and 24, they had business degrees they'd barely scraped by to get, and a finely honed sense of entitlement. Then he got to my name, to my granddaughter, Ava Monroe, the lawyer read, and a small, foolish flicker of hope ignited in me. I bequeath a special class of non-voting shares in the hope that she will always remain connected to the legacy I have built. Non-voting shares. The words just hung there in the still air. It was a gesture, a pat on the head. It gave me a seat at the table but took away my voice. It was a reminder that I was family, but not the kind of family that truly mattered. I heard Leo let out a soft snicker. Isabel gave me a look that was a carefully balanced cocktail of pity and victory. That evening, at a quiet family dinner that felt more like a corporate merger negotiation, Uncle Richard attempted to clarify things for me. He poured himself a generous glass of expensive scotch, the amber liquid glinting in the light. "Your grandfather loved you dearly, Ava," he began, his voice smooth and condescending. "He wanted to ensure you were always looked after." "He wanted me to be a part of the company," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was clutching the will in my hand. Non-voting shares aren't a part of it. They're a handout. Richard let out a long theatrical sigh, a performance of strained patience. "You're a brilliant girl, Ava. Top of your class, I'm told. But this business is no place for sentiment." He took a slow sip of his scotch. "Or for women. It's a brutal, cutthroat world. You wouldn't enjoy it." The words were supposedly meant to be protective, to shield me, but all I felt was a wall being built around me. I glanced around the dining table. Aunt Diana was nodding in agreement, her attention already drifting to the floral arrangement. Leo was glued to his phone, likely checking the stock prices of a competitor he dreamed of acquiring. Isabel was admiring a new diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. No one was listening. No one cared. They had already put me in a little box labeled niece, cousin, girl, a delicate thing to be kept on a shelf, admired from a distance, but never, ever taken down and used. "Grandfather thought I could handle it," I said quietly. "Your grandfather was an old man from a different era," Richard said, his tone dismissive and final. He didn't grasp the complexities of modern finance, leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers. It's a battlefield out there. Your role is to get your degree, find a respectable husband, and enjoy your life. Leave the fighting to the men. That was it. That was the precise moment the quiet ache in my heart crystallized into something else entirely. It was a cold, sharp resolve. I looked at my uncle, a man who had been gifted a titan of industry and was already treating it like his personal ATM. I looked at my cousins, who viewed the company not as a legacy to be honored, but as a birthright to be squandered. And I understood. They didn't just think I was incapable. They were terrified of anyone who was truly capable. Because real talent, real vision, would expose them for what they were. Hollow heirs sitting on a throne they hadn't earned. That was the day I stopped asking for their permission. For the next several years, I played the part they assigned me. I completed my degree in finance, graduating summa cum laude. I showed up at family gatherings, smiled politely, and made small talk. I listened to Isabel brag about her shopping trips to Milan and Paris, and to Leo boast about some minor acquisition he'd overseen. A deal I knew from public filings was poorly structured and would ultimately cost the company dearly. I saw the rot setting in. Richard started making reckless gambles. He poured money into flashy real estate projects that were all style and no substance. He neglected the company's core technology division, allowing their patents to lapse and their innovation to wither. He replaced my grandfather's seasoned, loyal managers with his own golfing buddies. I watched it all from the sidelines, a ghost at their hollow victory parties. I'd stand in a corner of the grand ballroom during the annual Monroe Manufacturing Gala, holding a glass of untouched champagne, and I would just watch. I saw the strained smiles, the desperate handshakes, the mounting anxiety in the eyes of the longtime employees. The company was bleeding, slowly but surely. Its foundation, built on my grandfather's principles of quality and integrity, was cracking under the immense weight of my uncle's ego. The final insult, the one that severed the last thread of hope, came when I was 25. I had poured months of my life into a proposal. I'd identified a massive opportunity in AI-driven logistics, a way to modernize the company's entire supply chain, and secure its future for the next half-century. It was detailed, meticulously researched, with conservative financial projections. I knew it was brilliant. I managed to secure a 10-minute meeting with my uncle. I walked into his office, the very same office my grandfather once occupied. But the warmth was gone. Richard had replaced the old oak desk with a monstrosity of glass and chrome. The walls were adorned with abstract art that conveyed nothing. He didn't even ask me to sit. He took my bound proposal, glanced at the cover, and placed it on the corner of his desk. Logistics, he said, a condescending chuckle in his voice. Ava, we build industrial machinery. We don't chase fads. This is a distraction. It's the future, I insisted, my voice steady. The projections indicate a 30% return on investment within 4 years. It would streamline our operations, protect us from global supply shocks. I have a team of analysts for that. He cut me off, his voice sharp with annoyance. You have a trust fund. Go buy yourself a new car or a condo in the Gold Coast. Enjoy your life. Stop trying to play in a league you don't belong in. He then picked up my proposal and, without even looking at me, dropped it into the trash can beside his desk. The gesture was so casual, so utterly dismissive, it felt like a physical blow. He hadn't just rejected my idea. He had rejected me, all of me, my intellect, my ambition, my last remaining connection to my grandfather's legacy. I didn't say another word. I simply turned and walked out of his office, past his secretary, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. I walked out of the Monroe Manufacturing Building, the towering monument to my grandfather's dream, and I didn't look back. They believed they had put me in my place. They believed they had won. But as I stood on the bustling Chicago sidewalk, the city's cacophony buzzing around me, I wasn't defeated. I was free. They had given me non-voting shares and told me to be silent. They had thrown my life's work in the garbage. They had made it unequivocally clear that as long as they were in charge, my only value was my silence. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted: silence. And in that silence, I would build my own empire. One they would never see coming. An empire that would one day be powerful enough to swallow theirs whole. I walked for hours that day. I left the towering glass and steel of the Loop and walked until the buildings shrank and the streets grew quiet. The proposal my uncle had so casually discarded felt like a lead weight in my memory. Every step I took was a conscious effort to shed that version of myself. The hopeful niece, the ignored shareholder, the girl who believed logic and hard work could earn her a place at a table she was never invited to. By the time the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the grief had burned away. All that remained was a cold, clear purpose. That night, I returned to my small apartment, a place my family had never bothered to see, and I made a promise to the woman staring back at me from the mirror. It wasn't a loud, angry vow. It was a quiet, simple contract. I will never need them again. I will never ask them for anything again. I will build something that is mine, and I will build it so high that their entire world will one day exist in its shadow. The first step was to sever all financial ties. My grandfather had left me the non-voting shares and a modest inheritance in a trust I could access at 21. It was a few $100,000, a pittance by Monroe standards. But to me, it was everything. It was the seed capital. It was the last piece of my grandfather I had left, and I refused to let it sit idle. The very next morning, I met with a sharp, independent lawyer, far removed from my family's circle of influence, and began the process of liquidating everything. I sold the shares back to the company for a fraction of their potential worth. My uncle's office processed the transaction as a minor accounting entry without a single phone call. To them, it was insignificant. To me, it was my declaration of independence. With that capital, I began to build, but I wasn't building a company with my name on it. Ava Monroe, the girl they knew, had to become a ghost. The world could not know what she was doing. So, I created a phantom. I named it Apex Holdings. Apex, like the peak of a mountain. My first headquarters wasn't a corner office. It was a rented desk in a cramped, noisy co-working space in a less fashionable part of Chicago, surrounded by aspiring app developers and freelance writers. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and desperate ambition. It was loud, chaotic, and the most invigorating place I had ever been. No one there cared about your family name. They only cared about your idea and your hustle. In the polished, stale halls of Monroe Manufacturing, I had suffocated. Here, I could finally breathe. That first year was a blur of caffeine and code. I worked 18-hour days, eating cheap takeout over my keyboard, my eyes glued to market data, SEC filings, and obscure technical journals. My strategy was simple. I would be smarter, faster, and more invisible than anyone else. I had my legal team construct a fortress of anonymity around Apex Holdings. We created a complex web of shell corporations and holding companies, each registered in a different state, each one a dead end leading to another. It was a labyrinth designed to protect the center. All transactions were routed through intermediaries. No one ever spoke directly to the principal investor. Apex Holdings had no face, no history, and no physical address beyond a P.O. box in Delaware. It was just a name on a wire transfer, a phantom player that moved with unnatural speed and precision. I started with small investments, targeting sectors my uncle and his board of old-school industrialists would never understand: bioinformatics, decentralized finance, and quantum computing. I wasn't chasing trends. I was looking for the underlying tectonic shifts in technology that would create new markets in 5 or 10 years. I made mistakes. My first few ventures were modest losses. The seed money dwindled. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, a cold knot of fear in my stomach. The thought of failing, of having to go back and admit defeat, was the only thing that kept me going. Failure was not an option. About a year in, I knew I couldn't do it alone anymore. I needed someone I could trust implicitly. I found her in Eleanor, an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm I used. She was fiercely intelligent, organized to a terrifying degree, and completely underestimated by her bosses. I saw the same fire in her eyes that I felt in myself, the quiet frustration of being the smartest person in the room and being told to just fetch coffee. I offered her a modest salary and a small percentage of Apex's future profits. "What does this company do?" she asked during her interview, which I conducted at a neutral coffee shop far from our respective offices. "We find value where others see none," I said. "Who's the CEO?" "You're looking at her," I replied. She looked at me, a 26-year-old in a simple black dress, and she didn't laugh. She saw the seriousness in my eyes. She took the job. Eleanor became my gatekeeper, my operator, and my only confidant. She filtered all communication, managed the intricate network of accounts, and was the only other person on Earth who knew that the mysterious Apex Holdings was run by me. The breakthrough came 18 months in. It was a small, struggling biotech firm that had developed a revolutionary gene sequencing patent. No one on Wall Street would give them the time of day. They were a month from bankruptcy. I spent a week day and night, tearing their research apart, running projections, and interviewing their exhausted founder under a pseudonym. I saw it. The potential was staggering. I invested nearly half of my remaining capital for a majority stake. It was an insane gamble. For 6 months, it felt like a catastrophic failure. Then, a major pharmaceutical giant announced a pivot in their research strategy. Suddenly, that little-known patent became one of the most valuable pieces of intellectual property in the world. They acquired the company. Apex Holdings' return wasn't just good, it was astronomical. My initial investment multiplied 1,000-fold. That one deal changed everything. Suddenly, Apex Holdings wasn't a struggling startup. It was a serious player. With the new capital, I moved faster. I hired a small, fiercely loyal team of analysts who worked remotely and never met me in person. They knew me only as AM, their enigmatic boss who communicated through encrypted messages and demanded perfection. And so the 7 years of silence passed. While my family attended charity galas and posed for society magazines, I was building. While Leo was being promoted to vice president of a division he was systematically running into the ground, I was executing quiet, bloodless takeovers of undervalued companies. While Isabel was planning her 3rd wedding, I was cornering the market on rare earth minerals essential for next-generation electronics. I never took a vacation. I never bought a fancy car. I lived in the same apartment for 5 years, pouring every dollar of profit back into Apex. My work was my life. The only satisfaction I allowed myself was watching the numbers on my screen climb higher and higher. Billions. The number became so large it was abstract, a score in a game only I was playing. Apex Holdings became a legend in the financial world. A ghost story traders told each other. A fund with no face, no history, that emerged from nowhere to make perfectly timed, ruthlessly effective moves. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile piece titled "The Apex Enigma," but they couldn't find a single person to go on the record. My family, I knew, read those papers. I sometimes wondered if they ever discussed the name Apex Holdings at their dinner table, completely oblivious. The thought brought a cold, thin smile to my face. On the 7th anniversary of the day I walked out of my uncle's office, I finally moved out of the co-working space. Apex Holdings' new office was the entire top floor of a private, unmarked skyscraper in a different part of the city. There was no name on the door. You couldn't get in without a biometric scan. It was silent, sleek, and looked out over the entire city. That afternoon, Eleanor brought me a tablet. On the screen was the day's financial news. There were 2 headlines side by side. One was an analysis of Apex Holdings' latest acquisition, speculating on the firm's mysterious and brilliant strategy. The other was an article about Monroe Manufacturing. Their stock had plummeted, a disastrous real estate deal had imploded, and rumors of insolvency were swirling. They were desperate. They were looking for an investor, a savior. I looked at the 2 headlines, my creation next to their ruin. I had kept my promise. I didn't need them anymore. But it was no longer about need. It was about justice. They had worshipped power, and in my silence, I had forged more of it than they could ever comprehend. And I was finally ready to show them what it looked like. The collapse of Monroe Manufacturing wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, creeping rot, like a grand old tree decaying from the inside out. For years, I had watched from a distance, tracking its decline through financial reports and market analyses. It was like observing a train wreck in slow motion. Every poor decision, every arrogant gamble my uncle made was just another data point on my screen. I knew the precise state of their ledgers, the exact weight of their debt. I probably understood the health of my family's company better than they did. They had grown sloppy. Their power had made them complacent, and their arrogance had made them blind. They believed the Monroe name was a shield that could protect them from any consequence. They'd bought a portfolio of flashy commercial real estate at the peak of the market, ignoring all the warning signs. They'd failed to innovate, letting my grandfather's core manufacturing business become an obsolete relic. They were dinosaurs admiring their own reflections in a puddle of tar, blissfully unaware that the sky was falling. The first public sign of real trouble was a disastrous quarterly report. The stock price, which had been stagnant for years, took a nosedive. Analysts began using words like troubled, over-leveraged, and lacking direction. I read the articles with a detached, clinical interest. There was no joy, no sense of victory. It was simply the inevitable outcome of a long-running equation. Ego multiplied by incompetence equals collapse. The call I knew was coming didn't come to me, of course. To them, Ava Monroe was still a ghost, a non-entity. The call came to Apex Holdings. It was a formal, desperate inquiry from a third-party investment bank hired by Monroe Manufacturing to find a lifeline. Eleanor patched the preliminary call through to me. I listened from my silent office, the city lights twinkling below, as a nervous banker explained the situation. Monroe Manufacturing is facing a significant liquidity crisis, he said, his voice tight with professional jargon that couldn't hide the underlying panic. But the company has strong fundamentals, a legacy brand. It's an excellent investment opportunity for the right partner. They're seeking a significant capital injection in exchange for a minority stake. A minority stake, even on the brink of ruin. Their pride was the one asset they refused to part with. They wanted a savior, but they still wanted to be king. Apex Holdings does not typically take minority positions, I said, my voice calm and even, altered by a light modulator to ensure it was unrecognizable. It was the anonymous, genderless voice of AM that my team knew. We prefer a controlling interest. I'm sure that's negotiable, the banker said quickly. Too quickly. They're flexible. They've scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday to discuss a potential offer. Would Apex Holdings be interested in preparing a proposal? We'll consider it, I said. Send over the full, unredacted financials. If we're interested, you'll hear from us by Thursday. I ended the call. The full financials were a formality. I already had them, obtained through my own channels. But the request established our position of power. They were asking for help. We were considering it. Eleanor came into my office, a tablet in her hand. They're bleeding faster than the public reports show, she said, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. Their creditors are getting nervous. They have a major debt payment due at the end of the month that they can't possibly make. They're not just looking for an investor, I said, looking out the window. They're looking for a bailout. For the next 48 hours, my team and I worked in silent, focused intensity. They believed they were preparing a standard, if aggressive, acquisition proposal. They crunched the numbers, outlined synergies, and drafted the terms of the deal. They had no idea about my personal connection. To them, this was just another undervalued, poorly managed company ripe for a takeover. It was what we did. We were predators, and Monroe Manufacturing was a wounded animal. My own work was different. I wasn't just looking at the company's finances. I was looking at its sins. For years, I had been quietly and legally acquiring their debt from various creditors. I had been tracking the shady side deals and the falsified reports my uncle used to hide his failures. I had every secret, every lie, documented and stored in a secure digital vault. The proposal I was drafting wasn't just about acquiring a company. It was about dismantling a regime. On Thursday afternoon, we sent our official response, It was not a proposal. It was a statement of intent. Apex Holdings, we informed the investment bank, had already acquired 45% of Monroe Manufacturing's outstanding public stock through a series of anonymous purchases over the past 2 years. The news would hit them like a physical shock. They had been looking for a savior at the gates, not realizing an army had already breached the walls and was living inside the castle. The banker called back within minutes, his voice trembling. 45%? How is that possible? The board had no idea. Apex Holdings values its privacy, was my simple, transmitted reply. The board, Mr. Monroe, would like to know your intentions, the banker stammered. Our intentions will be made clear at the emergency board meeting tomorrow, I said. We will have a representative there. Expect us at 10 a.m. I knew this would send a shockwave through the family. They were cornered. A hostile, unknown entity, a financial ghost, owned nearly half their company. Their emergency meeting to find a savior had just turned into a summit with their potential executioner. They would be terrified, desperate to know who they were dealing with. That evening, for the first time in a long time, my own phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but whose prefix I knew belonged to the Monroe family estate. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A message appeared a moment later. It was from my cousin Leo. His voice was strained, attempting a casual tone that was completely undermined by the tension in his words. Hey, Ava, it's Leo. Long time, huh? Listen, I know things have been distant, but you'll never guess what's going on at the company. Crazy stuff. We're having a big family meeting tomorrow morning, just to get everyone on the same page. You should come. Really, it's important you're there. Call me back. The message was laughable. A family meeting. After 7 years of complete and total silence, they were suddenly remembering I was a shareholder. They weren't calling out of love or regret. They were calling because they were desperate. They had looked at the shareholder registry, seen my name next to my worthless non-voting shares, and decided to summon the long-forgotten niece. They probably wanted to present a united family front to the mysterious Apex Holdings. Or maybe they thought my finance degree could offer them some last-minute insight. It was pathetic. They were calling me for help, not because they valued me, but because they had run out of options. They were turning over every stone, and there, underneath one, was me. I deleted the message without a reply. I would be at the meeting, but not as the forgotten niece they were hoping to use. I was the storm they didn't see coming. The family's fall was almost complete. All that was left was to step onto the stage and watch the final act. Friday morning, the air in Chicago was crisp and cold, the sky a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I chose my outfit with methodical care, not the sharp midnight blue suit I had waiting. Not yet. For this first encounter, I wore a simple but elegant navy dress and a beige trench coat. My hair was down, my makeup minimal. I needed to look like Ava Monroe, the girl they remembered. I had to be recognizable enough for their dismissal to be personal. Walking into the lobby of the Monroe Manufacturing Building felt like stepping into a photograph from another life. Nothing had changed. The same massive abstract bronze sculpture dominated the center of the room. The same scent of polished marble and recycled air hung in the atmosphere. The same security guard, a man named George who used to give me a piece of candy when my grandfather brought me to the office as a child, stood at the front desk. He looked older now, his face etched with worry, but he didn't recognize me. To him, I was just another woman in a trench coat, another anonymous face in a city of millions. The invisibility I had cultivated for 7 years was now a perfect cloak. I didn't need to check in. My old ID card, the one I was supposed to have surrendered, still worked on the main turnstiles. I had kept it as a souvenir, a small plastic rectangle with a faded picture of a hopeful 25-year-old. I never imagined I would use it again. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent. I watched the numbers climb, my reflection a faint ghost in the polished steel doors. I felt no nostalgia, no sadness. This building was no longer a monument to my grandfather's dream. It was a tomb, and my family were the ghosts rattling around inside, oblivious to the fact that they were already dead. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the familiar hush of corporate power greeted me. Plush gray carpet, dark wood walls, and the quiet hum of a world insulated from the noise of the street below. The door to the main conference room was closed. I could hear the low murmur of anxious voices from within. I was 5 minutes early. I saw my cousin Isabel first. She was standing by a window speaking on her phone in a hushed, irritated tone. She looked immaculate in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my first year's rent. She glanced up as I approached, her eyes scanning over me with a flicker of vague recognition before dismissing me as unimportant. Then the conference room door opened, and my Uncle Richard stepped out, followed by Leo. They were arguing. "We have no idea who these apex people are," Leo was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "They could be anyone. For all we know, it's a corporate raid from Sterling Price." "Don't be an idiot," Richard snapped. "Sterling Price doesn't have the subtlety. This is someone new." His eyes landed on me. For a second, he just stared, his brain working to place the familiar face in this unexpected context. Then, his expression hardened into one of pure annoyance. "Ava," he said, his voice flat. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "Leo called," I said, my voice even and calm. "He said there was a family meeting." Leo looked embarrassed, caught between his desperate summons and his father's obvious displeasure. Well, I thought you should be here," he stammered. "As a shareholder." Richard let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "A shareholder? Don't be ridiculous." He stepped forward, physically blocking the doorway. He was a large man, and he used his size to intimidate, to take up space, to make others feel small. It was a trick that used to work on me. "This is a meeting for executives, for the people who actually run this company, not for assistants or distant relatives." Isabel had ended her call and drifted over, her lips curled into a smug smile. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple dress. "Oh, don't be so hard on her, Daddy," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Ava probably came to take notes. Someone has to, after all." The words were so familiar, so perfectly in character, that I almost felt a sense of relief. They hadn't changed, not one bit. They were the same arrogant, dismissive people they had always been. My entire elaborate plan was built on the foundation of their predictability, and they were not disappointing me. I held my uncle's gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just offered a small, unreadable smile. "Actually," I said, reaching into my coat pocket, "I came as a shareholder." I held up my old company ID. The photo of my younger, softer face looked back at them. It felt like I was presenting evidence from a forgotten archaeological dig. Leo snorted, a loud, ugly sound. "Those worthless shares," he scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You came all the way up here for that? We're trying to save a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're waving around an ID for a handful of decorative stock certificates. The delusion is just, wow." They saw the ID not as a claim to a seat at the table, but as proof of my pathetic inability to let go. To them, I was still the little girl clinging to a meaningless memento. "This meeting is for successful family members only," my uncle repeated, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. The same words from the thumbnail of my life. It was perfect. "We don't have time for family drama or sentimental games. Go home, Ava." He didn't wait for a response. He stepped back into the conference room, and Leo and Isabel followed, Leo still shaking his head, and Isabel casting one last pitying glance over her shoulder. Then, the heavy mahogany door shut in my face. The thud was solid, final. The polished brass handle gleamed under the recessed lighting. I stood there in the silent hallway, alone. 7 years ago, they had shut me out with contempt. Today, they had done it again, with a mix of annoyance and pity. They thought they were putting me back in my place, closing the door on a minor, irritating distraction. I stood completely still for a full minute, listening to the silence. I felt the echo of that old humiliation, but it was a phantom pain now, a memory of a wound long since healed. This wasn't a defeat. It was the final piece of data I needed. It was confirmation that they had no idea what was coming. They were so blinded by their own self-importance, they couldn't see the executioner standing right in front of them. They had closed the door on Ava Monroe. It was time for them to meet the CEO of Apex Holdings. I did not allow myself the luxury of lingering. There was no time to reflect on what had just happened. It wasn't an insult. It was a cue. With the click of the boardroom lock echoing softly behind me, I turned and walked away. My footsteps were silent on the thick carpet as I moved down the corridor, away from the world of Monroe Manufacturing and toward my own. I passed my uncle's corner office, its double doors closed, his name embossed on a brass plaque, Richard Monroe, CEO. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. It was like looking at a name in a history book. He was already part of the past. At the end of the hall, concealed behind a paneled mahogany wall that matched the rest of the floor, was a small, unmarked door. To anyone else, it looked like a maintenance closet. I pressed my thumb against a nearly invisible sensor beside the frame. A faint green light glowed, and with a quiet hydraulic hiss, the door unlocked. This was the private elevator. I'd had it installed 2 years ago when I leased the top floor of the building under a shell corporation's name. The building management thought they were leasing the unused penthouse space to an eccentric, reclusive tech billionaire who demanded absolute privacy. In a way, they were right. The Monroe board had no idea their headquarters now had a secret tenant, one who could come and go from the very heart of their empire completely unseen. The elevator car was a simple, unadorned steel box, lit by a single cool white light. There were only 2 buttons, 40 and PH. I pressed PH and the doors slid shut, sealing me in silence. The ascent was fast and smooth. As the car climbed, I felt a sense of vertical distance from the drama below. They were down there, trapped in their boardroom, squabbling over the dying embers of my grandfather's fire. I was rising above it all, literally and figuratively. The doors opened directly into my sanctuary, the penthouse office of Apex Holdings. The contrast was staggering. The 40th floor was a museum of dark wood, old money, and stale tradition. My office was a cathedral of light, glass, and information. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a stunning 270-degree view of Chicago. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue, and the city spread out below me like a map of my own ambition. The floors were polished concrete, the furniture was minimalist and modern, and the only art on the walls were 6 massive, high-resolution screens, displaying streams of real-time market data from around the globe. Eleanor was waiting for me. She stood by a simple glass desk, a black leather portfolio in her hands. She wore a simple, severe black dress. her expression as calm and focused as ever. She had been with me since the days of the co-working space, the only witness to my entire journey. She didn't need to ask how the encounter went. She already knew. "They are still in the boardroom," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. "No one has entered or left since they closed the door on you. The investment banker is on a conference call with them, likely trying to explain our 45% stake. And they have no idea Apex Holdings is operating from their own building?" I asked, shrugging off my trench coat and laying it on a chair. "They have no idea Apex Holdings is you," Eleanor corrected gently, a flicker of a smile in her eyes. She held out the portfolio. "The final terms are ready, and their latest internal numbers just leaked from our source in their accounting department. They're even worse than we thought. They're desperate." "Perfect," I said, taking the portfolio. Its weight felt solid, real, the culmination of 7 years of silent, relentless work. I walked into my private adjoining room, a small monastic space containing a bathroom, a shower, and a walk-in closet. Inside the closet, hanging alone in a protective garment bag, was the suit, a midnight blue suit from a designer whose name was a quiet whisper of power. I had bought it a year ago for this specific day. I had never worn it. It was my armor. Slowly, deliberately, I began to change. I took off the navy blue dress, the uniform of Ava Monroe, the forgotten niece. I let it fall to the floor. I stood for a moment in the silence, seeing my reflection in the dark glass of the closet door. I was no longer that girl. That girl was a ghost. I stepped into the tailored trousers. The fabric was light but structured, cool against my skin. I put on the silk shell top, its texture smooth and frictionless. Then the jacket. The shoulders were sharp, the lines clean and severe. It fit perfectly. It felt like a second skin, one forged in discipline and fire. I sat at a small, unadorned vanity and began to work on my hair. I brushed it back, pulling it tight against my scalp, twisting it into a severe, intricate knot at the nape of my neck. Every pin I pushed into place felt like an act of securing my resolve. No loose ends, no vulnerability. When I was done, not a single strand was out of place. My makeup was next, a neutral base, a defined brow, and a dark wine-red lipstick that was as bold as it was severe. It was not the makeup of a girl hoping to be liked. It was the makeup of a woman who had come to collect a debt. Finally, the shoes. Black stiletto heels, sharp as daggers. I slipped them on and stood up. The extra height changed my posture, my center of gravity. I looked in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger to my family. They had dismissed a girl in a simple dress. They would be confronted by this woman, a figure of uncompromising, elegant power. This was not an identity I had inherited. It was one I had built from scratch, in silence and in secret, funded by my own intelligence and fueled by their dismissal. I walked back into the main office. The heels made a sharp, clean clicking sound on the polished concrete floor, a sound of purpose, of finality. Eleanor looked up as I approached. She took in the transformation, her eyes showing a quiet, profound approval. She knew the entire story behind the suit, the hair, the look in my eyes. She had watched me build this woman. She picked up a sleek, encrypted tablet from the desk. "The board is waiting. The market is waiting." She paused, her gaze meeting and holding mine. Her voice was steady. "Ready?" she asked. I looked out the window at the sprawling city I was about to conquer. I thought of the 7 years of silence, of the 16-hour days, of the girl eating takeout at a shared desk, of the promise I had made to myself on the day I was cast out. "Eleanor," I said, turning my eyes from the window to meet hers. I've been ready for 7 years. The ride back down to the 40th floor was a descent into the arena. The elevator was a silent steel cage, and I felt a profound, almost unnatural calm. The nervous energy I had carried for 7 years had solidified into something hard and clear, like a diamond. There was no more uncertainty, no more fear. There was only the plan, a complex piece of machinery I had built over years, and it was now time to turn the final key. Eleanor stood beside me, her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on the elevator doors. She held the tablet that contained every piece of leverage we had, every secret of the company now cowering in the room next door. We didn't speak. No words were necessary. We had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in our minds. The elevator hissed to a stop. The doors opened, and we stepped out into the familiar, plushly carpeted hallway. This time, everything was different. The few executive assistants seated at their desks looked up, their conversations faltering. They didn't see Ava Monroe, the forgotten niece. They saw a woman in a suit that radiated authority, flanked by an associate who moved with the same quiet confidence. They saw power, and their eyes followed us with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension as we walked toward the boardroom. The sound of my heels was absorbed by the thick carpet, but it felt thunderous in my own ears. It was a countdown. Each step was a year of my exile. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We reached the heavy mahogany door, the same door that had been shut in my face less than an hour ago. Eleanor, without a word, reached out and pulled the brass handle. She pushed the door open with a smooth, firm motion, stepping just inside the threshold. The scene within was one of contained chaos. My Uncle Richard was at the head of the long, polished table, his face red, his tie loosened. Leah was pacing by the window, agitated. Isabel sat perfectly still, a mask of strained composure on her face. A few other board members, old men who were my uncle's cronies, looked grim and defeated. The air was thick with desperation. They all looked up as the door opened, their expressions shifting to ones of anxious expectation. They were expecting a stranger, a representative of the mysterious Apex Holdings. They were bracing themselves to beg, to negotiate, to plead with the faceless entity that held their fate in its hands. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, clear and sharp. The CEO of Apex Holdings has arrived. As one, they all rose to their feet. It was an instinctive gesture of respect, of deference to the power they were about to confront. Then I stepped through the door. I walked into the room, and for a long, silent moment, there was nothing but confusion. I saw it on their faces. They looked at me, this woman in a severe midnight blue suit with her hair pulled back, and they tried to place me. Their brains registered the power in my posture, the cold confidence in my eyes, but they could not connect it to the girl they thought they knew. They were looking right at me, but they didn't see me at all. I didn't wait for them to figure it out. I walked past the stunned board members, my gaze fixed on the empty chair at the head of the table, my uncle's chair. He had stood up with the others and had taken a half step forward, his hand outstretched, ready to greet the man he assumed was coming to save or destroy him. I walked right past his outstretched hand. I reached the head of the table and placed my black portfolio on its polished surface. The sound was a quiet, authoritative thud that seemed to break the spell. Then I turned and surveyed the room, letting my gaze drift over each of their faces before I sat down in the CEO's chair. My chair. I looked across the table at my uncle, whose hand was still awkwardly hanging in the air. "Shall we begin?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. It was Leo who broke first. He had been squinting at me, a puzzled frown on his face. Suddenly, his eyes widened in horrified recognition. The phone he was holding slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly on the mahogany table. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Across from him, Isabel's practiced, welcoming smile froze, then cracked. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a painted mask on a statue. She looked from me to her father and back again, her mouth slightly agape. And then there was Richard. He lowered his hand slowly, his eyes locked on my face. I could see the gears turning, the denial fighting against the impossible dawning truth. He saw the girl he had dismissed, the niece he had patronized, but he saw her wearing the face of his conqueror. The two images fused in his mind, and the foundation of his world crumbled. "Ava," he whispered, the name a puff of air, full of disbelief and terror. The room was utterly silent. The board members looked back and forth between me and my uncle, their faces a canvas of confusion and shock. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted in the space of 30 seconds. I let his whispered question hang in the dead air for a long moment. I leaned forward slightly, placing my hands on the table, and met his terrified gaze with my own calm, cold one. "Still think I'm not cut out for business?" I asked. The silence that followed my question was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. My words hung there, sharp and heavy, and I watched as the full catastrophic reality of the situation crashed down upon my family. My Uncle Richard stared at me, his face a mottled canvas of red and white. The shock was giving way to a sputtering, incoherent rage. "You?" he finally managed, his voice a choked whisper. "You did this? This is some kind of joke." "A sick joke. I assure you, Uncle," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I am not joking." "This is impossible," Leo exploded, slamming his fist on the table. The phone he had dropped skittered across the polished surface. "You can't be Apex Holdings." We looked into them. "They're a global player, a ghost. You're just Ava. You're nobody. A nobody who now owns 45% of your company," I corrected him calmly. I opened the black leather portfolio in front of me. Inside were several neatly bound documents. I took out the top one, a summary of Apex's holdings in Monroe Manufacturing, and slid it down the length of the table. It stopped directly in front of my uncle. The shares were acquired over 24 months through a network of more than 50 holding companies. You never saw the pattern because you weren't looking. You never thought to look for a threat from someone you had already decided was worthless. Richard picked up the document, his hand trembling so badly he could barely read it. The other board members, pale, gray-faced men, crowded behind him, their eyes wide with horror as they scanned the undeniable proof. Isabel was the only one who seemed to have any fight left, but it was the frantic, desperate fight of a cornered animal. "This is illegal," she declared, her voice rising. "You can't secretly buy up a company. There are rules, regulations. We'll sue you. We'll have the SEC investigate you for hostile practices." I almost smiled. It was the predictable response of someone who had always used threats and lawyers to solve their problems. "Everything Apex Holdings has done is perfectly legal," I said, my gaze sweeping across the terrified faces. "Our legal team is the best in the world. Every transaction is ironclad." I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the next blow. "And a lawsuit would be unwise. For one, you can't afford it." As of this morning, Apex Holdings also acquired the portfolio of your largest creditors. We now own your debt. You are, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. This is no longer a negotiation. It is a foreclosure. A collective gasp went through the room. They weren't just facing a hostile shareholder. They were facing their banker, their creditor, their executioner. They were trapped. Now, I continued, my voice dropping into a quiet, businesslike tone that was more terrifying than any shout, as I already control a near-majority stake, and as I am your primary debt holder, I am presenting a final, non-negotiable offer. I slid a second set of contracts across the table. This is a tender offer to the non-executive board members here. Apex will purchase another 15% of the company's shares at 10% above market value. This will secure our position, giving me 60% ownership and absolute control. It's a generous offer. It will allow you gentlemen to exit this failing company with some dignity and a small profit. I suggest you take it. The board members looked at each other, their loyalty to Richard evaporating in the face of their own financial survival. They were businessmen. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. "You can't do this," Isabel stammered, her voice now thin and reedy. All the fight had gone out of her, replaced by a raw, childish disbelief. "This is our company. This is our name." I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking softly. I looked her directly in the eye. "I already did," I said, the words as cold and hard as steel. "The time for discussing what I can and cannot do is over. All that matters now is what I am going to do next." That was the moment Richard finally broke. He threw the document onto the table and surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. "Get out," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get out of my boardroom. You are not a Monroe. You are a traitor, a snake I never should have allowed in my house." I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. I just watched him, my expression unreadable. "Sit down, Uncle," I said, my voice quiet but laced with an authority that stunned him into silence. He stood there, frozen, his chest heaving. "You have one last choice to make," I said into the dead quiet. "All three of you." I looked at Richard, then Leo, then Isabel. "So far, this has been about business, but you have made it personal, so I will respond in kind." I nodded to Eleanor, who was standing silently by the door. She pressed a button on her tablet. The large screen on the boardroom wall, which had been displaying the Monroe Manufacturing logo, flickered to life. It now showed a file directory. The heading on the top read, "Monroe Manufacturing Internal Audit, Apex Holdings." "For the last 7 years, I haven't just been building a company," I explained. "I've been watching you. I've been collecting evidence, every secret account, every falsified quarterly report, every time you used the company's funds as your own personal piggy bank." My gaze settled on Richard, like the Horizon Point real estate deal. "When it went bad, you covered the initial losses by borrowing from the employee pension fund, didn't you? An illegal act. I believe the SEC would call that embezzlement." My eyes moved to Leo. "And you, Leo. Your division has been posting profits for the last 3 years, except those profits are based on fraudulent sales to shell companies you secretly control. That's wire fraud, a federal offense." The room was as silent as a tomb. Eleanor, with another tap, brought up a scanned document. It was a bank statement from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, showing a transfer of funds from one of Leo's shell companies directly to him. Leo stared at the screen, his face as white as a sheet. "I have everything," I said softly. "Every email, every wire transfer, every doctored invoice, a complete and perfect record of your corruption, compiled by the best forensic accountants in the world." I reached into my portfolio one last time and pulled out 3 single-page documents and 3 expensive-looking fountain pens. I slid them across the table, one in front of Richard, one in front of Leo, one in front of Isabel. They were their letters of resignation, effective immediately. "This is your choice," I said, my voice low and final. "You will sign your resignations. You will forfeit your severance and any remaining stock options. You will walk out of this company today and never come back. In return for your silent cooperation, this audit," I gestured to the screen, "will remain private, the property of Apex Holdings." I let the alternative hang in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. "If you refuse," I finished, "Eleanor will forward this entire file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to the U.S. Attorney's Office before we even leave this room. You will not only lose the company, you will be publicly disgraced, buried in legal fees, and in all likelihood, you will go to prison." I stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. "You have 5 minutes to decide." The 5 minutes I gave them felt like an eternity. No one spoke. The only sounds in the room were the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow breathing of the 3 people whose lives were collapsing. I stood by the window, my back to them, and looked out at the city. I did not want to watch them break. My goal was not to revel in their suffering, but to achieve a clinical, necessary amputation. The rot they represented had to be cut away for anything healthy to grow in its place. Behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair, then the frantic rustling of papers. One of the board members, a man named Henderson, who had known my grandfather, spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Richard, there's no way out of this. It's over." A choked, guttural sound came from my uncle. It was the sound of a king realizing his castle was made of sand. Then I heard the scratch of a pen. Once, twice, 3 times. Eleanor's voice, calm and professional, cut through the silence. "The documents are signed." I turned back to the room. The resignation letters lay in the center of the table. The 3 pens lay beside them. Leo was staring blankly at the wall, his face utterly vacant. Isabel was weeping silently, her perfect makeup ruined, her shoulders shaking. My Uncle Richard looked ancient. The rage and power had drained out of him, leaving behind a frail, defeated old man. He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Everything I built," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Everything you inherited," I corrected him, my voice not cruel but firm, a simple statement of fact. "Grandfather built this company. You were just its caretaker, and you failed." That, more than anything else, seemed to break him. He slumped in his chair, the last bit of fight gone. "The board accepts the offer from Apex Holdings," Henderson announced formally, his voice shaky. The other members nodded in grim agreement. They had chosen survival. "Eleanor will escort you out," I said to the room at large. "To my family," I added. "You will be allowed to collect your personal belongings from your offices. A security detail will accompany you. You have 1 hour." One by one, they filed out of the room. The board members left first, avoiding my gaze. Then Isabel, her face hidden behind her hands. Leo followed like a sleepwalker. My uncle was the last to leave. As he passed me, he stopped. He looked at me, at the woman in the power suit who was his niece, his conqueror. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. He simply shook his head and walked out of the boardroom, a king leaving his throne for the last time. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, leaving Eleanor and me alone in the silent, empty room. The battle was over. The rest of the day was a blur of controlled, efficient action. While the news of the Monroe family's sudden, shocking resignation spread through the building like a virus, Eleanor and I were already working. We held an emergency all-hands meeting via video conference. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, the camera on, and introduced myself. "My name is Ava Monroe," I began, my voice steady, projecting a confidence I knew was essential. "As of today, I am the new CEO and majority shareholder of this company. I am the founder and sole principal of Apex Holdings, the firm that has just acquired a controlling interest in Monroe Manufacturing. I let that sink in. I knew the rumors must have been flying, the name Monroe causing confusion. I addressed it head on. Yes, Theodore Monroe was my grandfather. I grew up in this company. I believe in what he built, but I do not believe in what this company has become. That changes today. I spent the next hour laying out my vision. I didn't talk in vague corporate platitudes. I was direct. I explained that we would be undergoing a massive restructure. We would be selling off the toxic real estate assets my uncle had acquired. We would be tripling the R&D budget for the technology and manufacturing divisions. We would be restoring the employee pension fund and instituting a new profit-sharing plan. We were going back to my grandfather's principles: innovation, quality, and integrity. The era of rewarding incompetence and entitlement is over, I concluded. From now on, this will be a meritocracy. Your last name will not matter. Your connections will not matter. Only your work will matter. We are no longer in the business of managing a decline. We are in the business of building the future. Now, let's get to work. The effect was immediate and electric. The stock, which had been in free fall, stabilized and then began to surge as news of the Apex Holdings acquisition and the new leadership was made public. The financial world, which loved nothing more than a dramatic takeover story, was ecstatic. Analysts who had written off Monroe Manufacturing as a dying relic were now calling it the most exciting turnaround prospect of the year. For the first time in nearly a decade, the Monroe name stood for something strong again. But this time, it was under me. The empire, which had been crumbling, was now mine to rebuild. And I would rebuild it in my own image, stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever before. That evening, I stood in the CEO's office. My uncle's office. My office. The transition was already underway. His heavy, ornate furniture was gone, replaced by the clean, minimalist pieces from my own office upstairs. The abstract art was gone, and in its place, on the wall behind the desk, was a single, massive black and white photograph of my grandfather on the factory floor, smiling, his sleeves rolled up. The city lights glittered outside the panoramic window, a sea of infinite possibilities. 7 years ago, I had stood on a sidewalk below, a girl with nothing but a small inheritance and a silent promise. I had been completely alone. Now I stood at the top, not just of a building, but of an entire industry. Eleanor entered the office softly, holding a tablet. "The final transfers are complete," she said. "The resignations have been processed. They're gone." "And the audit?" I asked, not turning from the window. "Sealed. It will never see the light of day, as long as they honor the terms of their agreement." "They will," I said. "Fear is a powerful motivator." Eleanor came to stand beside me, and for a moment, we just looked out at the skyline in silence. She was the only person in the world who knew the entire truth, who had been with me on every step of the journey. 7 years ago, I said quietly, more to myself than to her, in this very building, my uncle told me that business was no place for a woman. He told me my job was to get a degree and find a good husband. A rare, genuine smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I imagine they'll all have to find new jobs now." "Poetic justice," I murmured. "It turns out revenge is just good business." The sentiment wasn't triumphant or gloating. It was a simple, quiet statement of a circle being closed, of a balance being restored. My motivation had started as a wound, a need to prove them wrong. But over the 7 years of silence and hard work, it had transformed. It was no longer about them. It was about me. It was about building something real, something that would last. The takeover was not the end of the game. It was the beginning. Eleanor left me then, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I walked over to the large desk, my desk, and sat down in the CEO's chair. It fit perfectly. I ran my hand over the cool, smooth surface and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, displaying the soaring stock price of Monroe Manufacturing. A new era was beginning, an era built not on inheritance, but on merit, an era defined not by arrogance but by vision. I had not just taken back my family's company, I had reclaimed my name, my legacy, and my future, and I had done it on my own terms. The city was quiet now. The work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly at peace. I was exactly where I was supposed to be.